You've heard of Melchizedek, but they never told you who or what he really was. What if he wasn't just a man? What if Melchizedek predated humanity itself? Before Adam, before Eden, before even let there be light, there existed a throne, and upon that throne, a name without genealogy, a being who appears from nowhere and vanishes just as quickly, a character so enigmatic that the Bible says he had no beginning of days, nor end of existence. Have you ever stopped to consider what that really means? What you're about to discover may surprise you. For centuries, theologians have tried to explain who this king of justice was. Some said he was a symbolic figure. Others, that he was Christ himself in veiled form. But what if there was a third hypothesis, one that was never taught from pulpits, but circulated in ancient text-spanned books and forgotten manuscripts? Texts that speak of beings who came before creation, of celestial priests and entities that guarded the mysteries of creation long before man set foot on earth. Stay with me until the end, because this goes beyond religion. It goes beyond common theology. It's a journey to the enigmas hidden at the beginning of everything, to the origin of divine mysteries. Because Melchizedek is not just a mysterious figure. He may be the key that connects the visible world to the invisible, the bridge between time and eternity, between what is revealed and what has been hidden. Have you ever felt like there's something wrong with the official accounts? That they've been hiding something from you? Perhaps this concern is about to be answered, because by understanding who or what Melchizedek was, we begin to unravel not just a character, but much deeper cosmic structure, a presence that predates even the angels. But this is just the beginning, because what comes next will take you to a place few have dared to look. And as you absorb all this, perhaps something within you has already begun to stir, a memory, an intuition, that old feeling that there is something more, something that has always been hidden between the lines of sacred texts, but that few have had the courage to seek. Melchizedek is not just an ancient name in an ancient book. He is an inverted mirror of forgotten time, a silent presence among the erased chapters of creation. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what's touched you most so far. Perhaps a phrase, an idea, or just this strange certainty that something big is hidden in plain sight. Your experience can awaken others, and your voice here is a living part of this search for revelations. And if this kind of content resonates with you, don't forget to like the video. It seems simple, but every like shows the algorithm that this message matters, that it needs to reach more people like you, people who feel that truth lies not only in words, but in the silence between them. And of course, if you feel like you're finding something here that you've never found anywhere else, subscribe to the channel, because this journey is just beginning. And in the coming chapters, the remaining veils will fall. Your presence here strengthens this community that is forming, made up of seekers, the restless, the awakened. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content. And each new soul reaches another link rebuilt in the lost chain of creation. And speaking of missing links, brace yourself, because Melchizedek may have been just the first guardian. There are others, and perhaps they're still among us. A priest without father, without mother, without origin, without genealogy, without beginning or end. He's not a symbolic figure, but someone or something who appears at a crucial moment in the biblical narrative and then simply disappears. Hebrews 7 says it clearly. Without beginning of days or end of life, made like the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. This description doesn't fit any common human definition. Is that human to you? The Bible is clear on some things and mysteriously silent on others. Melchizedek appears before Abraham, the patriarch of an entire people, and blesses him. Detail: Abraham gives him tithes. Now think with me. What kind of authority would a man have to acknowledge to offer part of what he has earned? Abraham, the one who heard the voice of God, bows before a king whose origins are unknown. This alone should raise alarm bells. But that's not all. The name Melchizedek carries more than a title. In Hebrew, it means king of righteousness. And he reigns in Salem, ancient Jerusalem, called a city of peace, justice and peace. Two pillars that, according to ancient sacred texts, support the divine throne. This is not just a story of an ancient encounter. It is a hidden reflection of the very spiritual structure of the universe. Justice and peace, masculine and feminine, heaven and earth, time and eternity. Melchizedek appears as the one who integrates opposites, and perhaps for this reason, he transcends the categories of ordinary creation. He is not just a priest. He is a priesthood, a model, a spiritual standard that predates the Levitical system, even before there was a temple, a tribe, or a commandment. Now I want to delve even deeper into the subject, because there's something about Melchizedek's presence that challenges the very concept of time. When the author of Hebrews states that he remains a priest forever, he's presenting us not only with an eternal being, but with a state of existence that doesn't depend on our linear clock. This echoes ideas present in esoteric and Gnostic traditions, where certain beings exist outside the timeline, acting behind the scenes of creation. They're not gods nor ordinary angels. They're consciousnesses, living archetypes that take form when necessary, and then return to their original dimension. What if Melchizedek were one of these? A one-off manifestation of an eternal consciousness? An emissary of primordial wisdom, set not to reign over physical territories, but to activate a hidden truth in the hearts of whoever encountered him? It is no coincidence that he appears before Abraham, the first to walk with God by faith, not by inheritance. Perhaps at that moment, Melchizedek was sealing a covenant not just with one man, but with an entire spiritual lineage. The transformation this causes in our perception of the Bible is immense. Traditional theology ignores the symbolic and spiritual impact of this encounter, but there is a trace, almost invisible, but still there, as if Melchizedek leaves marks wherever he goes. A silent yet powerful language, capable of activating an inner calling in those seeking it. A key that opens not physical doors, but portals of consciousness. So what we're doing here is more than exploring an ancient character. It's deciphering a forgotten code. A spiritual map that takes us back to the origin of creation, to the original mindset, to that point where time, form, and name had not yet been separated. Melchizedek invites us to step outside the obvious, the surface, and delve into a journey where the answers lie not just in words, but in the space between them. A journey that isn't about blind faith, but about deep listening, about intuition, about decisions born of the Spirit, not dogma. Comment there, I'm on this journey too. Genesis 14 introduces us to Melchizedek in just 3 verses. 3. That's all the traditional narrative offers about one of the most mysterious figures in the entire Bible. He appears, blesses Abraham with bread and wine, receives the tithe, and disappears, as if the universe had opened a crack in time just for him to appear at that precise moment, without context, without explanation. And then, centuries later, the author of Hebrews, one of the most dense and spiritually sophisticated books of the New Testament, returns to his figure with surprising force, not as a historical reminder, but as a living symbol, a mirror of the eternal Christ. Without genealogy, without father, without mother, without beginning of days, this description is more than enigmatic. It is disturbing. It violates the logic of Scripture as we are accustomed to understanding it. And perhaps that is the intention. Now think about it. The Bible is full of genealogies, meticulous details of lineages, tribes, parents, and children, generations recounted with almost mathematical precision. But Melchizedek, who appears at a central point in spiritual revelation, has none, nothing. No prophet, no scribe, no psalmist dare reveal where he came from or where he went. Doesn't that sound strange? Why hide the origins of someone so important, to the point of being compared to the very Son of God? Christian tradition has tried, over the centuries, to offer comfortable explanations. Some say he was merely a symbol. Others, that he was an incarnation of Christ before the incarnation. But all these attempts come up against a fundamental question. Why was his identity treated with such silence? Why does the sacred text, which does not hesitate to recount the failures, intimate details, and even tragedies of biblical characters, choose to shroud Melchizedek in a veil of absolute mystery? This is a time when we begin to distrust official versions. And I'm not talking about empty theories, but about a sincere journey in search of hidden truth. Because when something so important is so zealously left aside, it's not absence, it's intention. It's a silence that screams. And it's precisely there that the transformation of our mindset begins, when we realize that some gaps were left not by chance, but as invitations. Invitations to search behind the scenes of spiritual history, in the spaces that institutional religion didn't dare illuminate. Now I want to delve even deeper into the subject, because when you begin to study the historical and spiritual context of Genesis 14, you discover that the war between kings, the backdrop to Melchizedek's appearance, has layers that go beyond tribal politics. It was a dispute over territory, yes, but also a war over symbols, over spiritual portals. And Melchizedek appears as the one who represents the supremacy of divine justice over human power structures. He doesn't fight. He doesn't take. He blesses. And with that, he seals something much greater than a military victory. He activates a pact. This kind of activity, silent, yet with profound spiritual impact, is typical of beings who work behind the scenes of creation. And this leads us to a question few dare ask. What else was left between the lines of the Bible? What other figures emerged briefly, only to those with attentive eyes, and revealed truths that were not directly expressed? Because the biblical text is not just a linear account. It is a field of codes, symbols, and layers. And perhaps Melchizedek is the densest of all these codes, a name that holds within itself an entire structure of creation. Understanding this is not just a theological exercise. It's an awakening, because the figure of Melchizedek challenges everything we've been taught about time, priesthood, authority, and access to the divine. He wasn't from the tribe of Levi. He wasn't a descendant of Aaron. And yet he was recognized as a priest of the Most High God. This in itself changes everything, because it points to a type of priesthood that doesn't depend on human blood, but on spiritual designation, a priesthood that predates time and perhaps continues to operate today in dimensions most can't even imagine. The impact of this is enormous, because if Melchizedek existed before human religious structures, then he invites us to a kind of direct connection with the divine, one that doesn't involve systems, hierarchies, or titles. It's a raw, ancestral connection, made of silence, presence, and truth. It's the kind of revelation that doesn't fit in a sermon, but can completely change your inner journey. And if you feel this, perhaps you're already attuned to this subtler, higher vibration, one that doesn't need words to be understood. Comment there, that makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into the subject, because to understand the mystery of Melchizedek, we need to stray from the conventional path. We need to touch upon texts that have been excluded, avoided, or simply forgotten, and not by chance. There's a hidden trail, a trail erased by time, where fragments of Melchizedek's true identity still survive. Texts like the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and other manuscripts that are not part of the official canon, but which keep an ancient flame alive, a flame that burns behind the scenes of sacred history. In the Book of Enoch, for example, we find mention of elevated beings who do not fit into the traditional angelic structure. They are entities that hover above time, silent observers, bearers of wisdom that predates even the fallen angels. And although Melchizedek is not directly mentioned there are descriptions of celestial figures with priestly functions, beings who operate as bridges between dimensions, as guardians of spiritual codes. In other words, beings who operate outside of human chronology, but within a divine order that predates creation as we know it. In the Book of Jubilees, we find something even more disturbing, a narrative parallel to Genesis, which reconfigures the timeline and reveals details that the Judeo-Christian tradition chose not to preserve. The priesthood does not begin with Levi, but traces back to a heavenly lineage, a lineage born not of flesh, but of light. And within this context, insinuations emerge of a being who bears eternal priesthood, who acts before the law, before the tablets, before the prophets, a hidden but decisive presence. There are also fragmentary texts, such as the Qumran scrolls, that speak of a priest of eternity, one who reigns forever, outside the sequence of historical events. In some passages, he is called Melchizedek, and is described not as a man, but as a manifestation of divine justice, a spiritual agent with the authority to forgive sins and judge nations. This is not only rare, it is disruptive. because it places Melchizedek in a position that transcends the earthly priesthood and points to a cosmic function, one that operates within the invisible fabric of reality. Now stop and reflect on this. Why were these texts excluded? Why so much effort to erase or marginalize records that could expand our understanding of key figures in spirituality? The answer may lie precisely in what they reveal, because when you access these sources, your mindset changes. You're no longer dealing with religious narratives, but with information that directly impacts your inner journey, your way of seeing the world, perceiving the divine, and interpreting your own existence. The hidden truth lies not only in these books, but in the resistance that exists around them. And that's precisely where the impact lies. It's not about rejecting tradition, but about completing it, about recognizing that what has been presented to us as everything may be only a part. And when that part begins to be questioned, the possibility of true transformation arises. The transformation of those willing to see with new eyes, to listen with new ears, to access another layer of spiritual reality. Melchizedek, then, becomes more than a mysterious biblical figure. He becomes a living symbol of this quest, a connection point between what has been revealed and what remains to be discovered, a portal to a more intimate, bolder, and profoundly liberating spirituality. And the closer we get to this point, the more we realize how personal the journey is, almost solitary at times, but always sacred. Because the path of those who seek what has been hidden will never be the easiest, but it is undoubtedly the most revealing. Right there, I follow the forgotten trail. Now I want to delve even deeper into the subject, because perhaps Melchizedek was never just a historical figure. Perhaps he is something greater, much greater, a kind of cosmic mirror, a divine archetype that spans time and narrative as a living symbol of what lies beyond form. Think about it. Everything about him is the absence of limitation. He has no beginning, no end, no human lineage, nor any earthly religious system. He exists, and that alone breaks all categories. Some scholars have dared call Melchizedek a manifestation of the Logos, the divine word before the incarnation. Others believe he is the incarnation of a primordial Elohim, an entity of a sacred order that precedes the pillars of material reality. And when we look closely, we begin to understand that Melchizedek doesn't fit in because he wasn't made to fit in. He doesn't come to confirm doctrines, but to challenge them. He doesn't appear to repeat what is known, but to activate what has been forgotten. In the field of deep spirituality, the idea of archetype is powerful. An archetype is not just a symbolic image. It is a living intelligence, a matrix of energy that inhabits both the invisible plane and the human interior. Melchizedek, in this sense, carries the archetype of eternal justice, absolute peace, and pure priesthood, one that is uncontaminated by human interests, that seeks not dominion but balance. He is the synthesis between king and priest, between government and transcendence. And more than that, he is the principle of sacred order, the harmony that sustains the universe before duality, before the fall, before the fragmentation of consciousness. This pattern also appears in ancient traditions outside the biblical context. In Egypt, there was Thoth, the divine scribe, mediator between the worlds. In the Vedic tradition, we find Varuna, the ruler of the cosmic order. In Persian myths, we encounter figures who hold the keys to time and celestial justice. What this shows us is that the Melchizedek archetype is universal. He manifests in different cultures under different names, but always with the same function: to restore lost order, remind creation of its sacred origin, and offer a path back to the source. This revelation can trigger a true transformation of mindset. It forces us to look beyond the figures and see the patterns. And patterns are eternal. They repeat themselves because they are part of the structure of reality. When we access the Melchizedek archetype, we are accessing a model of consciousness that dwells within us, not as a belief, but as a possibility. The possibility of integrating justice with mercy, silence with wisdom, action with contemplation within ourselves. What if this presence still works? What if Melchizedek, as a living archetype, still manifests in the lives of those ready to receive? It may not be with robes, nor with words, but with signs, synchronicities, subtle invitations. Because this kind of energy doesn't force, it whispers, and only those who are silent can hear. Perhaps he is closer than we imagine, not in form, but in essence, in the moments when we choose truth, even when it hurts, when we bow to the sacred without expecting reward, when we decide to sustain peace even in the face of chaos. It is at this point that everything changes, because Melchizedek ceases to be a distant figure and becomes an intimate calling, a mirror that reflects what we have forgotten to be. And this is a true impact, realizing that the sacred is not only in texts, but in gestures, that the eternal lives not only in the heavens, but also in the space between one thought and another, that justice, when pure, is a form of healing, not condemnation. Comment there, I recognize this pattern. Now I want to delve even deeper into the subject, because sometimes the true enigma lies not just in the lack of information, but in the hidden meaning of what was said. And Melchizedek, in this respect, is an entire spiritual map hidden in two names, King of Righteousness and King of Salem. It seems simple, but when you begin to decipher what these expressions convey, the veil begins to tear almost inevitably. The word Melchizedek in Hebrew comes from Malchi, my king, and Tzedek, justice. That says a lot. He is not just a king who practices justice. Hen justice, an incarnate principle, a force that acts where creation threatens to fall apart. And what's more, he reigns over Salem, the ancient name for Jerusalem, whose root is the same as shalom, meaning peace, plenitude, harmony. Therefore, what we have here is not just a mysterious man who appears in Genesis, but the very union between justice and peace, two pillars that sustain the spiritual order of the cosmos, two extremes that rarely coexist in the human world. And then something even more intriguing reveals itself. In Psalm 85, there's an enigmatic passage that says, "Righteousness and peace have kissed." Many theologians have dismissed this verse as poetry. But what if it's a code? What if you're talking about Melchizedek, a being who integrates these two principles and acts as a silent axis between worlds, between dimensions, between the visible and the invisible? When you look closely, you realize that this name carries the DNA of original balance. And if we think in deeper spiritual terms, it leads us to consider something even bolder. Melchizedek would actually be a conscious throne, not just someone who occupies a position of power, but the very living manifestation of ordered and incorruptible power, an entity that manifests itself whenever creation needs to remember its sacred origin. That's why he appears silently, without explanation, without fanfare, because the deepest sacred doesn't need to announce itself. It simply is. The silence surrounding Melchizedek isn't absence. It's a kind of language that can only be understood by those who have learned to listen with other senses. The absence of father, mother, or descendants isn't a lack. It's transcendence. He doesn't belong in the common narrative because he operates on a different frequency, a point outside the line, like a portal that appears only to those ready to cross it. This kind of presence is rare, and its function is not to draw attention to itself, but to remind the observer where it came from. Melchizedek, in this sense, is like an echo of the word before the flesh, a reflection of that which will become fully manifest in Christ, but which already vibrated in the folds of time before time began to count. And here, everything changes, because if he is an echo, then he carries the original vibration, the pure note that precedes a division between heaven and earth, between spirit and matter. This vibration is still present. Sometimes we feel it as a restlessness, other times as a calling we can't name. But it's there, latent, waiting. And names like Melchizedek aren't coincidental additions to ancient texts. They are keys that unlock something within us. If we have the courage to leave the known and walk reverently into the unknown, perhaps this is what Melchizedek's name and title reveal most. Not who he was, but what he awakens. The remembrance of a deeper order, of a code that has been forgotten but still pulses deep within the soul. Justice, peace, silence, three forces that, together, not only heal the outer world but realign the inner world. Comment there, I listen to the sacred silence. Now I want to delve even deeper into the subject, because behind the silence of the canonical texts, there are echoes preserved by voices that dare to go beyond the surface. Rabbis, priests, mystics, all of them, at different times, reported visions and understandings that defy the linear logic with which we have been taught to think. For these men and women who access more subtle layers of reality, Melchizedek was not a being who was born. He simply appeared, like a flash of light in the darkness, like something that was already there, waiting for the right time to reveal itself. There are ancient writings, passed down through esoteric traditions and initiatory orders, that speak of beings called manifestos, entities that do not follow the flow of birth, growth, and death. They are consciousnesses that emerge by design at strategic moments, with a specific function. They need no history or past, because they carry within themselves their own purpose. Melchizedek is described by some Kabbalist rabbis as one of these, a being who appears not because the world produced him, but because the world spiritually requested him, an emissary of the eternal order. Some desert fathers in the early centuries of Christianity left fragmentary records, almost like whispers on parchment, of spiritual encounters with a luminous figure, whose name remained unspoken, but which left the feeling of being confronted with a living mystery. One wrote, "I don't know who he was, but the peace that inhabited his eyes predated creation." Another, in ecstasy, declared that he who appeared had no shadow, nor did he leave footprints, but transformed the place into an altar. In both accounts, the same energy was present, the recognition of something eternal touching time briefly but definitively. In Gnostic traditions, there are also references to an entity known as the priest without trace, a being of such profound purity that no matter can contain him. For these mystics, Melchizedek is more than a biblical name. He is an access code, a spiritual frequency that manifests whenever creation needs to remember its uncorrupted origin. According to these accounts, he was sent even before the emergence of humanity, to prepare what they call the eternal altar, a vibrational foundation upon which all true spiritual reconnection can occur. This altar is not made of stone, nor of gold. It is made of pure intention, of alignment, of surrender, and it is available, even today, to those who approach the journey with reverence. What these testimonies show us is not just an enigmatic character, but an ongoing spiritual phenomenon. Melchizedek did not pass away. He passes away. He did not live. He lives, because his function is not historical. It is archetypal, active, present. And here something very powerful begins to emerge. Because if these encounters are real, and many believe they are, then perhaps Melchizedek is not someone who just appeared once to Abraham, but someone who still appears for those who need to be reminded of who they are. And this doesn't necessarily come through a literal vision. It could be a dream, a silence that changes everything, an inexplicable presence at a decisive moment, that instant when chaos gives way to a reasonless peace. And you know you're not alone. These extraordinary accounts are not fabrications of those seeking fame or attention. On the contrary, almost everyone who experienced them preferred anonymity, because they knew they were dealing with something that cannot be put into words. But they decided to record it, even if only in a few lines, so that some seeker in the future might find it. And perhaps, at this very moment, you are that person. Perhaps you are hearing this not by chance, but because something within you has already recognized this vibration. You have felt this subtle call. You have had contact, even without naming it, with this presence that does not demand faith, but invites truth. That's why the journey through Melchizedek isn't just a historical investigation. It's an inner summons, an invitation to listen, a reminder that there's a sacred point within each of us that wasn't created, just revealed. And when we touch that point, everything around us begins to reorganize itself. Doubts become stepping stones. Silence becomes language. And life itself reveals itself as part of a much greater mystery. Comment there, I recognize his presence. Now I want to delve even deeper into the subject, because there's a question that runs through everything we've seen so far like an invisible arrow. What if Melchizedek is a key? The key not just to a biblical mystery, but to the very spiritual structure that predates creation, the key to understanding who reigned before the earth, before the flesh, before the reckoning of time, a fixed point in the eternal, whose existence doesn't depend on dates or doctrines. It only reveals itself when the consciousness is ready to see. This idea is not a metaphor. For many mystical traditions, Melchizedek is literally the link between what exists and what never ceased to exist, a being who is not limited to the human categories of past, present and future. He's simply in a state of pure presence, an intact consciousness that has never fallen, never been corrupted, never forgotten its origin. And that is precisely what makes it so dangerous to fix religious structures, because it doesn't need them. It precedes them all. It carries within itself an authority that was not given, but is intrinsic. If this is true, and many believe it is, then Melchizedek is not a figure who appeared and then disappeared. He is still here, perhaps not in form, but in function, perhaps not in words, but in frequency. Perhaps he never left this world. He simply moves on another level, on another vibration, the level that can only be accessed by those who decide to pierce the surface veil and enter the silent realm of revelation. This possibility transforms everything, because it shifts our search from something external to something internal. It forces us to stop looking for signs in the sky and start recognizing vibrations in the spirit. The real question, then, perhaps isn't who was Melchizedek, but rather, why does his name continue to pulse within us so strongly? What does it want to remind us of? What is it trying to reactivate? What if he is a guardian of a hidden truth about the very origin of humanity? A silent presence that watches over everything, since before the foundation of the world, waiting for the right moment to act again. A link not to the future, but to the beginning. And the beginning, contrary to what we've been taught, is not a point in past. It is a dimension that still exists, alive, untouched, sacred, and it can be accessed. This kind of revelation demands a decision. The decision to no longer be content with ready-made answers. The decision to seek even when everything around us tells us to stop. The decision to connect with this eternal priesthood that also dwells within us. Because if Melchizedek is an archetype, an active consciousness, then his altar is not in Jerusalem. It is in the consciousness of those who invoke him with purity, with thirst, with humility. The impact of this isn't just theoretical. It's practical. It affects choices, paths, relationships. It transforms the way you see the world and yourself. Because once you recognize his presence, nothing else seems ordinary. Details become signs. Silence becomes full. Waiting becomes preparation. And everything begins to point to a reunion. Not with character, but with your own origin. And this is where another possibility begins to emerge. Because Melchizedek wasn't the only one. There are others, other presences, other beings who weren't born, who didn't die, but who remain active behind the scenes of creation. Beings who hold secrets older than Adam, older than time, older than light itself. Comment there, I feel like something has been watching me since the beginning. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you also recognized this calling. Perhaps it was an old memory, a sense of familiarity with something that doesn't yet have a name, or perhaps just a silent certainty that this search makes sense. And that's why it makes sense to be here, on this journey, on this channel, in this space created for those who no longer accept living on the surface of things. If this content touched you, if it brought you value, if it made you truly reflect, then subscribe to the channel. That way, you'll continue accessing these messages, these keys, these revelations that can't be found anywhere else. Together, we'll continue to unravel mysteries that have been forgotten, hidden, or perhaps simply dormant. And for me, it's very special to know who walked all the way to the end. So, leave a comment here saying, I'm with you until the end. It's your way of showing me that this encounter was worth it, that the connection was real. And if you felt that way, please also leave a like on this video, because that way it continues to travel, reaching other awakened souls like yours. There's a video here that complements this topic. Click and follow me there, because the next revelation may be even older than you imagine.